All right, we are looking at our agenda for week 7. The first thing we're going to do is go over our objectives. Then we're going to talk about several kind of small, separate topics today, but they're all things that need to be embodied into your final presentations. They're topics that you need to consider and think about how you can work them into your presentation as you start putting it together. So those topics are sequence and reinforcement, relevance and immediacy, praxis, learning with thinking, feeling, and action, engagement, and then we're going to go over your concepts and your homework for this week. Alright, so our objectives for this week. Following our discussion here, you guys will be able to defend the importance of praxis. You'll be able to address immediacy and engagement within your program design. And you'll know how to identify concepts for your family life education program based on your needs assessment. Okay, if we move on, our next little sub grouping of topics for today is relevance and immediacy. So this is going to answer the question why. We have the why portion of your binder that you're putting together. And if we think back, we remember why addresses why does the audience need information on this particular topic? How is this topic going to help them cope with and enjoy the phases of life? It needs to be a topic that is picked specifically for your audience. So when you're thinking about your concepts, again for today, you need to make sure that your topic makes sense for your specific audience. Every single one of you have a different audience, and so you're going to have a different topic that's important and relevant for them. And that why question, you need to think about what scenario is happening at your agency right now. What's the current situation that's going on there that calls for them to have a need for you to present on your specific topics that you're planning to present on. And those topics need to be immediately relevant to your audience, which means they can see an immediate connection between what you're talking about and their daily lives at work. They can automatically see from the beginning why you're talking to them about this. Kind of the worst case scenario would be that at the end of the semester you get in there to present and your entire audience is wondering, why are we talking about this right now? Why is she or he presenting to us on this topic? So you need to make sure, even from the beginning when you're picking your concepts, that your concepts are relevant immediately to your audience. They can immediately see the relevance of what you're teaching them to their everyday life. And part of the reason that is important is because adults learn best when the topic is immediately relevant to them. Adults do not have time to waste. You are all adults, you're aware of that. If you're learning something in a class that you know you're not going to be tested on or you're not going to have to use ever in your class or in your career, it's really going to be hard for you to care about what you're learning. That's one of my favorite parts of this class is that each week the parts that you're putting together in your discussion question you actually need for your binder at the end of the semester. So there's no wasted work in this class. Everything you're doing is building towards something at the end of the semester. And I think that's just the best way to respect your audience's time. The best way for me to respect your time is not to have busy work, but to have meaningful assignments that really work towards something for your benefit. And you want to keep that in mind for your audience, to have a meaningful presentation that is beneficial to them, that they can see right from the beginning. So, like I mentioned, that is respectful of your audience. Adults feel respected when they know that you've considered them and you've designed your presentation specifically for them. Adult learners are going to learn best when they can relate their learning directly to their life experiences and when it has immediate usefulness to them. So they can see clear as day exactly how what you're presenting to them relates to their life, and they can clearly see an immediate usefulness for their everyday life. And then they also learn best when they are immersed in the learning process, and that means what we talked about prior with your repetition of your information, making sure that they're hearing the same thing in multiple different ways and that they're having to interact with it in different ways. So maybe you teach them information on something, you have them do an activity by themselves on the same topic, and then you have them do an activity all together on that same topic. That's allowing them to interact with the same thing in 3 different ways, and that's immersing them in that topic. A really interesting fact about adult learners is that they only learn about 20% of what they hear, about 40% of what they hear and see, and about 80% of what they hear, see, and do. So you really want to make sure that you're having them hear the information you're teaching them, that they're seeing it either in a handout or on a PowerPoint, and that they're doing something with it at the end of the day. So you have an activity for them to do with it, and that they're able to go back to their everyday life and immediately use the information that you teach them in a practical way in their everyday life. So again, if we think about this class, each week you guys are seeing the information on the PowerPoints, you're hearing me talk through it, and then you're doing something with it. You're practicing it each week in your discussion questions that build up to your final binder. And that's not so that you can have to hear the same thing or have to deal with the same thing 3 times. It's so that we have an 80% chance of that information really sticking with you. And those statistics do come from your Vela textbook that you have been doing your critiques from. And do take a couple seconds to think about, we're talking about adult learners here. For most of your time here in the program at USM so far, you've been talking about student learners as far as giving presentations to people or presenting and teaching. This is the first time that we're really talking about how do we best teach adults. So you got to make sure that you have that shift in your brain take place. You're not putting together a lesson plan to teach children here. You're teaching adults, and we have to make sure that we do that very differently than we would teach or interact with children in the other settings that we've learned about so far. Alright, so the next set of topics we're going to talk about are Praxis, learning with ideas, feelings, and action, immediacy. Actually, we already talked about immediacy. So then we'll jump right into engagement. Okay, so Praxis, I'm pretty sure most of you have already heard the word Praxis, but you're going to need to kind of erase everything that you've heard about that word. When we say Praxis here, we are not referring to the exam that you have to take to get licensed to teach. This is a completely different meaning of that word, and the meaning that we're going with here is the Greek form of the word praxis that means action with reflection, which means that we're doing something that causes us to reflect on the way that we do things. And that's because adults learn best by doing, having hands-on experiences where they can interact with information. So praxis involves a way of doing, reflecting, deciding, changing, and new doing. So let's break that down. In your presentation, you're going to teach your audience something. Then you're going to give them an opportunity to do it, to actually do what you've taught them. That's going to happen through an activity during your presentation. Then after that activity, there should be some type of reflection on what they've just done. In that reflection, they're going to say, this is what we just learned here, how to do this. This is how I did it before. And then they're going to decide. They're going to say, do I want to keep doing it the way I did it before, or do I want to do it this new way that I've just learned? And hopefully they'll either adopt the new way that you've taught them, or they'll kind of merge the two together, the old and the new. Hopefully you're not presenting information to them and then having them completely reject it and still go back to the old way of doing things. If that's the case, then we probably haven't given them the best presentation possible. But our goal is for them to reflect and really decide to change the way they do things, and that will result in a new way of doing things in the future. So that process kind of needs to happen throughout your presentation. And some examples of ways that we can get them thinking about that idea is asking prompting questions such as, what would happen if we did this instead of this? Or how do you see your programs functioning in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? How do you want your programs to look? And that kind of question will get them reflecting on the way they do things and deciding if they want to change and do things differently in the future. Alright, so learning with ideas, feelings, and actions. This is a big one because we really want to address all 3 of these things. We want to teach the whole person. We don't believe that people can be completely segmented into the way they think about things, or the things they do, or their feelings about something. All of those things interact to really create a whole human being. And so we encourage true learning when we teach that whole person by really targeting the head, the hands, and the heart, the body, mind, and soul through thinking, feeling, and doing. And that's going to be our goal, is to design a presentation that really captures all of those different elements experience of a whole person. And part of the way that we're going to do that is by engaging the learner in all of those different areas. We're going to engage them with thinking, feeling, and doing in the process of what they're learning. So you're going to have different activities throughout your presentation that target their thoughts, their thought processes, their feelings, their emotions, and their actions, their doing. And these activities don't have to be elaborate, but they do have to target these 3 different areas. And that's going to happen. You're going to have at least 3 different activities that happen, 3 different objectives for your presentation. We'll be putting those together in the coming weeks. And you need to have one objective for each of those areas of the person. So we're going to have an objective that says how we're going to engage our audience through ideas. We're going to have an objective that says how we're going to engage our audience through feelings. And then we'll also have an objective that shows us how we engage our audience through actions. And that's going to break down into the different domains of learning. If we think about ourselves, just the way we learn best, some of us are hands-on learners, so we like to write things out or actually practice doing something, and that's the way we learn best. Some of us can just listen and hear, and things stick with us pretty well after that. Some of us are visual learners. We have to see things. We can remember the specific colors of things or how they looked. Those are all different ways that we learn. Similarly to the 3 domains of learning, which are cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. So in effective programs, you're going to have all 3 of these domains, and your program will be an effective program, so you're going to have all 3 of these domains represented in those objectives that I mentioned. So when you're putting together your objectives, they need to cover the cognitive or thinking part of a person, the affective or feeling part of a person, and the psychomotor or the doing part of a person. And we want to pay particular attention to the affective domain or the heart of the person, because that's really going to be where their values lie. And if we can tap into somebody's values or their feelings about something, we're really going to be the most likely to be able to affect change in that person. So if we break those down, the cognitive domain refers to intellectual learning. So that's going to be most often what you think of in a stereotypical classroom. You're doing cognitive learning. Problem solving, learning new knowledge, comprehension, application. An example of an objective that would fall under this cognitive domain would be, by the end of today's class discussion, all groups will evaluate the importance of praxis. So that's a cognitive process, evaluating something. You're not doing anything, you're not feeling anything, you're just cognitively processing and evaluating the importance of a concept that's been discussed. So cognitive domain is really probably the one that we're the most familiar with in an academic setting. Then if we look next to the affective domain, this is going to refer to the emotions and value system of a person. It includes their feelings, their values, things they're apprehensive about, things they're really excited about, what motivates them, and the attitudes they have. And so we want to have at least one objective that really taps into the affective domain of the person. An example of that would be the student will identify what motivates them to help others. So within that objective, we're saying that students are going to tell us what motivates them, what drives them, what is a personal connection for them to why they want to help other people. And that's going to tap into those emotions and values for that student. It's going to help them remain engaged with whatever would follow from that objective. So that's the affective domain, talking mostly about feelings and values. And then lastly, we've got the psychomotor domain. This is skills-based and involves imitation, practice, and habit building. Anytime you think of psychomotor, think of actually doing something with your hands or your body, any other part of your body. but really making sure that you're doing something. So an example would be the student will implement a 30-minute PowerPoint presentation which includes an icebreaker. So that's an actual objective for your presentations. And you're going to physically stand up, give a 30-minute presentation, and make sure that it includes an icebreaker. That's something you're going to physically do, and so that's a psychomotor domain. In a couple weeks, when we start putting together our objectives, and you're trying to decide which domain did this objective fall under, think through a couple of factors. Is speed a factor? Is equipment other than the four walls of a classroom and an overhead projector necessary? Are you going to grade the activity in some way other than paper and pencil evaluation? And if you answered yes to any of those, the learning domain will be labeled psychomotor. They're going to be doing something more than thinking about it or feeling something about it. They're going to be actually doing something if you're answering yes to any of those questions there. So use that as a guide when it comes time to label your objectives for your presentation as to what domain they fall under. All right, and a quote that kind of is going to guide us as we're putting together our presentations, making sure that the theme and the feel of your presentation kind of falls under this quote, is talk to the head but aim for the heart. So that means we want to give them actual knowledge, cognitive knowledge they can do something with, but we want to make sure that that information relates to their heart, that it's important to them, and that they value the information that we're teaching them. So I want you to take a second and brainstorm how you're going to embody all of these concepts in your presentation, because it does us no good to know these concepts, to know what they are, to know that they're important, if they don't end up in your presentation. So you really need to make sure that you take some time this week to think about praxis, learning with ideas, feelings, and actions, immediacy, and engagement, and thinking about how your presentation can incorporate all of these aspects into it in the end. Alright, so let's take a second to talk about your concepts. This week in your discussion post 5, you are putting together your concepts, which is not going to involve a whole lot of writing. It is going to involve a whole lot of thinking, because your concepts have to make sense, they have to be purposeful, and they have to fit for your audience. So you're going to pick your concepts based on the results of your LNRA, your survey that you've passed out. And your concepts are going to represent the main topic or idea and the title for your presentation with your subtopics. The title for your presentation should be represented in your main topic, and then your subtopics is how that's going to break down within your actual presentation. You need to make sure that your concepts can be effectively covered in the allotted time. Don't pick a concept that's too big to be covered during a 30 to 35 minute presentation. And remember that these concepts are the things that are included in your agenda at the beginning of your presentation. So you're going to have an agenda slide just like we do in here every week. And like this week, if we think back to the agenda slide, we had all the topics we've talked about today on there. We had immediacy, we had engagement, we had praxis, we had learning with thinking, feeling, and ideas. Those were the concepts for our presentation today. So when you give your presentation, you're going to have the title of your presentation, and then your concepts will be listed there in your agenda, just like ours were today. Okay, so some examples. If, let's say, your audience was 20 soon-to-be pregnant women from Forest General Hospital, so women who are trying to conceive, what topics would we pick for them? Some ideas would be signs of folic acid deficiency, CDC mandates about folic acid in pregnancy, and sources of folic acid in your diet. Those are 3 things that fit together. They go together well. They could be discussed within 30 to 35 minutes, and they all kind of fall under a theme relating to folic acid. And you can see that they also relate directly to the audience. That's something that these women would be very, very interested in. So if our topic were a little different, if our audience were a little different, we had 20 to 30 senior men and women who come to a local senior center. We would not be presenting to them on the same topic that we would present to those soon-to-be pregnant women. We would present to them on things that relate directly to their life. So some examples of that might be resources for seniors, resources for home care, resources for housing, and resources for long-term care. So those are all topics that are very relevant to seniors, and they all fall under a theme of resources for them. There's a million different topics that would be relevant to senior men and women, but we need to make sure that those topics all fit together under a common theme, and here we see that we've got resources as that common theme. Okay, so this is kind of how your page should be set up. You're gonna just type straight into your discussion post for this week, but you're gonna need to translate that into a Word document at some point when you get ready to put your big binder together. And how that's gonna work is you'll just have concepts written at the top of the page, and then you'll have your main title or your theme, and then your sub-concepts listed below. So if communication in the workplace was the title or the main theme for your presentation, you would have that listed with your 3 subtopics listed below: communication with coworkers, communication with clients, and appropriate email communication. Those are not the only 3 ways to break down communication in the workplace. If those were my subtopics, it would be because I learned from my LNRAs that those are things that my audience is concerned about. How to communicate with coworkers, with clients, and how to communicate appropriately through email. All of that would have to come directly from my surveys, but this is just an example of how it should be formatted in your final Word document. So definitely bookmark this slide and make sure you come back to it when it's time to put that together. Okay, so you want to make sure that in creating your concepts, you're picking things that will focus your presentation. So remember, these concepts are part of both your binder and they're a guide for your presentation. They represent what your presentation is about. And you have to make sure that you let your agency know your main topic. You don't have to let them know each specific subtopic, but whatever your theme or your topic or your title for your presentation, whatever you plan for that to be, you need to kind of run it by your agency. Not everybody at your agency, but whoever your point of contact is, whoever you've been working with the most closely, run that by them to make sure they're supportive of it. You don't want to show up at the end of the semester and give a presentation that is in any way offensive or confusing for your audience. So make sure that when you have completed your discussion post for this week, you either call your agency or go up there and talk to your point of contact about what you're planning to do, and make sure that they think that's a good idea for your presentation for them. We talked about your audience description last week, and in that I mentioned that your audience description kind of breaks down in 2 different ways. One of them is actually describing your audience, and the other way is relating your audience specifically to your topic. So the main ways that your audience is going to need to be related to your topic in your paper, your audience description paper, is that knowledge section. So what knowledge do they have related to the topic that you pick? What prior training or education do they have in the area of the topic you pick? How is your topic going to be beneficial for your audience? And how does your topic affect the cultural characteristics? So within that section, you're going to just describe their culture, but you also want to talk about how that relates to your topic. So if we go back to the example of communication, if you've got all males in your audience, they're going to communicate in a very different way than if you had all females in your audience. So think about how culture is impacting the topic that you're planning to present on at your agency as well. And make sure as you're going through your audience description paper for each section, you're relating it back to your topic. Alrighty, so your homework for this week. The first section of your homework is Critique 5. That's going to be due on Friday by 5, as usual, is your last critique, and it covers chapters 10 and 11 of your Vela textbook. Then you've got ASL Form 1. You can find that under the assignment section. Scroll down to the forms. The form is uploaded there, as well as the submission spot for the form. We talked about it last week, but just remember it does need to be signed by your agency, and it documents that you've completed your first 3 hours of your service learning. Do take a second to look back at your syllabus and recognize that if for whatever reason you're not able to complete your service learning hours by the designated dates, that does result in a 0 for the course. Students cannot put together these presentations if you haven't completed your service learning hours. So make sure that you've got that done and that you're submitting the forms to document that to me. Communicate with me if you're having trouble getting any of that done, because we need to stay on top of that so you can keep progressing forward in the class. You also have to submit your completed LNRAs. These are the ones that you passed out at your agency, and they actually wrote the answers in there for you. So for both Form 1 and your completed LNRAs, you've got to scan those in and upload them to the document submission spot. This is an online class, so it's expected that you're able to do that. Technical issues are not accepted as an issue for having late work. These forms and your LNRAs need to be submitted on time for next week, just like usual. If you don't have a scanner, if you don't have a way to upload them, take a picture of each one of them and upload it that way. If you're going to take a picture, I need to be able to read everything on the document. So don't take a picture from far away. Make sure it's legible and I can read it. If you need to use a scanner, there is a scanner in the library where you can scan in all those documents, save them, and upload them to Blackboard. And then lastly is your discussion 5, which is your concepts for your presentation and for your binder. So if we look at discussion 5, just a reminder, your concepts are going to be your topics for your presentation. You should have an overarching main concept or topic with no more than 3 sub-concepts or topics. You can't have less than 2 and you can't have more than 3. So your subtopics, you should have either 2 or 3 of them. You're going to determine what your concepts are based on the results of your needs assessment completed by your agency. Your main concept for your agency needs to be something that meets the needs of your agency and is specifically tailored to them. Make sure that your presentation is on a topic that interests them. And it should also be something that is manageable for the amount of time that you have, which is 25 to 30 minutes. You need to make sure that your main concept as well as your sub-concepts are well connected and that it all fits together as a cohesive presentation. So as far as what you're actually going to write in your discussion post, first you're going to write a short summary of your needs assessment. So you're going to say, these are some of the themes that I found, this is what they talked about the most, that kind of thing, summarizing it for us. And then you're actually going to list your main concept as well as your sub-concepts. Again, a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 3 sub-concepts. There is a document, a Word document, attached to discussion 5 that can kind of help you process your surveys to figure out what topics you should present on. The first page is just kind of a way to write that out, write out what themes you see, what topics you see, what fits together. And then on the back page is kind of a bubble map, a way for you to visually map that out. The top bubble is where you would write your main concept, and then the bottom bubbles is where you would write your sub-concepts. There's kind of 3 bigger bottom bubbles, and then a bubble that comes down from each of those. That does not mean you should have 6. You should still only have between 2 to 3. Those 3 bubbles underneath, the initial 3 bubbles, are just for writing any notes that you have about that topic or what you might want to say about it. You don't have to turn that sheet in, it's just for brainstorming. You in no way have to fill in all of the bubbles. It's just to kind of give you a visual guide as you're trying to come up with what your concepts are. If you're having trouble coming up with your concepts, if you're looking at your LNRAs and you're like, I have no idea what I should present on, let me know, set up a meeting with me, come by and chat, or shoot me an email. Don't do that on Friday, the day that it's due, but sometime throughout the week, as you're working on these, let me know if you're having trouble. And then for your peer response, you're still responsible for responding to your peer feedback partners. You do not have to follow the standard that we've been following for the last two. For this one, you want to make comments specifically on your partner's concepts in the following areas. You need to tell them if you think the concepts fit well together. So does it make sense, those concepts together as a whole? Is it coverable in the allotted time frame? So do you think that those concepts are going to be good and easy to cover in 25 to 30 minutes, or is it too much information for that time? And does it make sense given the results of their needs assessment? They're going to summarize their needs assessments for you, read through that, and then see what their topics are, and see if you think their topics or their concepts make sense based on their needs assessment for their specific audience. So those are the three kind of main things you need to be commenting on this week as you are giving constructive peer revisions to your partner's concepts. Obviously, if there are any spelling or grammar issues within their concepts, make sure you kind of give that feedback on that. But these concepts don't have to be full sentences. They're not in paper formats. There shouldn't really be any grammar or spelling issues there. Do make sure that you start on this week's discussion post sooner rather than later. It can be harder to brainstorm these concepts than it seems. And then make sure after you've decided on your topics that you are checking in with your agency and making sure that these topics are okay with them for your presentation.